All right, joining us this afternoon is Dr. Nathan Gibbs. Now, Nathan has quite a career in professional sport. It started off as a player for the South Sydney Rabbitohs, and then he became a sports physician. And in his time being a sports doctor, he's looked after teams as varied as the Australian Rugby League team, the South Sydney Rugby League team, the Manly Rugby League team. What we're going to speak to him about today is his 15 years as a Sydney Swans doctor. Most recently, he's had 3 shifts, I think, as a New South Wales State of Origin doctor and also the Wallabies doctor for the last 3 years, including the last World Cup. He has probably seen far more sportsmen and coaches in this country than anyone else. So, Nathan, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving up a bit of time.
No trouble, Luke and David. I will just point out my very first year in rugby league was with the Great Eastern Suburbs Club, which you don't mind, as a supporter, and actually with the Swans I ended up covering 18 years. So I've spent a large part of my life with those guys, which was fantastic.
Excellent. Now, one thing you would have learned I know you love Perth, is that you would have learned over here is AFL is the religion over here. And you spent 15 years in the inner circle, or 18 years in the inner circle with the Sydney Swans. You were there for both premierships in the last 20 years. Let's go straight to the West Coast Sydney rivalry, the 2000s. There's no escaping that over a 4-year period, almost every game was decided by single figures. There were some epic matches.
It was fantastic when the 05-06 period, I think even a bit after that as well, but certainly in that period, in the qualifying finals, I think there were 2 we had at West Coast. I think Perth won one and then Sydney won the other. And then we met again in the grand final, the same result. Sydney won one and Perth won the other. It was just it was probably the way it should have been in the end. 2 great teams, with nothing between them and sharing the booty a bit, one each. So I think that was probably a good result in the end.
Yeah. Was there a specific West Coast player that you remember, it was Paul Roos in charge back then, that they respected or feared more than the others?
I think the massive thing about that West Coast side, when you had Dean Cox, Judd, Cousins and Kerr, it was the most potent midfield you could imagine, and Cox was nearly unstoppable. So that the only thing the team tried to do was they knew they couldn't stop them getting 30 to 35 possessions each. All of those midfielders, they just wanted them to get the ball in the defensive end. So if Cousins was getting the ball behind the ruck, running in a wide arc backwards, the Swans didn't mind that at all. Okay. Whenever they ran forward from the ruck, we were in big trouble. So that the whole focus for the Swans was just to keep them in their half of the field and let them kick the ball as much as they liked.
Okay. Now, 2005, obviously before we talk about the grand final, let's go back 2 weeks to the semi against Geelong. Now, our headmaster and his whole family are mad Geelong fans, to the point that, I know not to even ask about Geelong after they lose. I might well be out of a job just by bringing this up, but that's all right. Hopefully my contacts in Sydney will look after me. But that semi-final, Swans down by 20 points in the 4th. Nick Davis kicks 4 goals. What do you remember of that night?
Well, you've got to understand leading up into that. In 2003, we made the prelim and got beaten by the Lions in a home prelim final. Okay. When we probably should have won to go into the grand final in 2003, but obviously Brisbane were a gun side. And so in 2004, we didn't perform as well. And then in 2005, to get to the qualifying final and to get bumped out in the semi-final would have been a massively negative for the club. And I can guarantee you probably half the football team would have been cold, because they would have said, this side can't win a premiership, it's on the slide. There was a lot of bad karma about, a lot of pressure going into the Geelong game that, hey, if you lose this, careers are over for a lot of people, including staff, a lot of coaches. And I often say to Nick Davis when I see him that he probably saved my career, as the physios and the S&Cs and everyone else involved in the club. His 4 goals that came from nothing were just amazingly sensational. His 4 goals saved the careers of a lot of people at the club, and obviously led to a premiership that year and kick-started people's careers for a long time after.
Yeah.
Good, Nathan.
So
Thanks.
It was one massive game, but it was interesting losing the qualifying final to West Coast that year. Ruse said to them after the game that he actually said if they play like this in each of the other games, they'll win the comp. In that he didn't feel that they deserved to lose, even though they did in that qualifying final, because he thought they played so well. So that he was really backing them to back themselves. And obviously, Nick Davis did that in the semi-final, and then in the prelim against St Kilda. It's probably the best the side's played, arguably ever in terms of the quality of their footy. They were just outstanding in that away game down at Etihad against St Kilda, and that set up the rematch in 05.
Yeah.
Let's go straight there. So, Nathan, I was lucky enough to go to both of those grand finals. I had a fantastic time at both, just amazing games.
I think I saw you at both in the end.
I was abusing you over the fence there at some stage. But, look, they hadn't won a grand final for 72 years, so known as the Bloods, obviously, before going up to Sydney. But what was the build-up like for Sydney going into that 2005 grand final?
Well, for me, I'd never done anything like that, so it was amazing. But for the AFL players and the diehard supporters and the people at the club who've been at the club, for many years and never experienced it. I think they got to one in '96 and got beaten. So there weren't many of those players. In fact, I don't think any of those were left in 05. Mick O'Loughlin's probably the only one who played '96 and 05 from memory.
Yeah.
And so most of the players and no one ever won a grand final that they could ever remember. So that for the South Melbourne supporters, certainly Sydney Swans, no one ever won a grand final. So the build-up the excitement was there, and there was a nervousness of, we don't lose. So there was also that pressure about not losing it, while at the same time trying to win it and enjoy it at the same time.
And what were some of the medical issues going on that we don't obviously hear a lot in the clubs are very protective as they head into these big games and they'll carry players. So what were you having to deal with behind the scenes leading into that first grand final and the other ones if you need to? But what was happening behind the scenes that was really quite stressful for the club at that point?
Actually, I do remember one of the. Obviously, Leo Barry took his famous mark, but one thing he did do well, he broke his cheekbone probably a week before the first final, or in the first final. And that might have been the week before. So he played all the final series with a cracked cheekbone, which was very tough. But also we tried not to let anyone know about it, so that probably helped a little bit as well. But that was an injury you can obviously play with, but you can certainly re-injure pretty easily if you got hit on it again. But it certainly didn't affect the way you tackle the ball.
Yep.
Obviously don't get to run through the banner on those days, but 100,000 people in the MCG, there's no greater feeling, and I think day of sport anywhere in the world just about. I'm sure you got a tinge of excitement as you entered the MCG at the game time.
Well, the best thing that happens is the teams warm up probably 30, 40 minutes before the game starts, and you go out with the team for the warm up. And you walk out to the middle of the MCG, but it's obviously a full house still, by that stage, over 100,000 people at least. And the atmosphere, and because I'm standing in the middle of the MCG, in the middle of the centre circle, and just looking around at the enormity of the crowd and the atmosphere, and actually thankful that I don't have to actually run out there and play, because it'd be just enormous to think of the pressure you'd be under. So the atmosphere on the players, and I suppose once they start playing, they don't focus as much on the crowd, but certainly before the game starts, the pressure's unbelievable.
Now, go to the last few minutes. So Sydney hanging on to a lead. Up steps Leo Barry. Do you remember, even when you look at the replays, it's almost hard to hear the siren in the background. Do you remember where you were then and what happened directly after that?
Actually, I remember, and few people mightn't remember this either, but Leo Barry was also the one who did the kick out straight to Dean Cox, I think, so that he nearly lost us the grand final, and then made up for it by catching the return kick back in, which was just outstanding. And I just, because no one could hear the siren, certainly where we were, and because of the noise of the crowd, and he never quite knew exactly when the game was about to finish because we didn't have access to the clock at ground level. And if people ask me, what was I doing the moment the siren went, I'd say I was probably just standing there. When you look at vision, I think the whole bench was attacking each other, jumping on top of each other. It was like you couldn't jump on the players because they were too far away, so you jumped on the next person you could see in the Swans outfit. So it was just like pandemonium on the bench. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Now there'll be some, particularly parents will be listening to this that saw that grand final, and David next to me probably thinks the same, that there should have been a free kick paid to West Coast for in that marking contest. What do you say to those people, Nathan?
Allegedly. And I thought the umpiring on the day was outstanding. I'd like to see the vision again, but yeah.
Look, before we go any further, Nate, let's fast forward 12 months to 2006 because this is starting to get a little bit out of hand. So, can you talk to us around the different emotions of losing a grand final of that nature, and again by solitary point in that 2006 grand final?
And I must admit, not having ever been involved in winning one, to win the first one you're involved in was just unbelievable, because the alternative of losing a grand final is just horrific. So I'm so glad I'd won it the year before and lost it the second year rather than losing the first year. That would have been just terrible. Which West Coast, obviously, that team would have gone through. It's such a bad event to lose simply because you then go back to the pre-organised 1,000-person sit-down dinner at a corporate function for each team, in Melbourne. And so it's so well organised, but for a losing team and a losing organisation, it's exactly not what you want to do, and so having to go through that as a losing team, it's just so diabolically sad. It's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah. Now, fast forward 6 years, 2012 Premiership against Hawthorn. Now, I've heard you tell me this story, Gibbsy, but I'd like you to repeat it if possible. Adam Goode's knee injury, and he kicked, I think, the second or third last goal. If you can just enlighten from a doctor's perspective what happened that day.
Well, Goodsy, one of his great attributes, he's a great human being, he's a great player, he's a dual Brownlow medalist, but he's actually one of the toughest players I've ever been involved with. He's had injuries. He tore his PCL in one of his knees in probably 02 or 03. He played the very next week after rupturing his PCL. Ruzi at the time moved him down to be a defensive player. So he went from being a forward or midfielder to being a defensive player for 4 or 5 weeks, but kept playing and playing his role for the team. So anyway, in this grand final, he hobbles off, I think, in the middle of the second quarter. So certainly, well in the first half, certainly not late in the second. And he said, "I've just hurt my knee, Doc, can you have a look at it?" And I looked at it and immediately knew he'd had a ruptured PCL and said, "Oh, no, it's okay, Goodsy, it's only your PCL. You'll be okay." And he said, "Oh, that's my other knee." I said, "Oh, well, now you've got two. You've got a matching pair. Nothing to worry about." And with that, he just said, "Oh, good, a matching pair." He jumped up, strapped his knee and ran straight back out there as if nothing was wrong with it. He played, obviously, all of the second half. He actually kicked the goal to put us in front, I think, in actual fact. He kicked the second last goal before Mal kicked the goal to put us beyond doubt. So Goodsy was amazing that day. And what he could do is the quality of how he played when he went back, and just the fact he could go back mentally, his toughness was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, Nick Malcheski mentioned that snap over on the left foot over his shoulder from about 20 out in front. More amazing scenes. I was lucky enough to be at that one. It was, and I had one of the best sporting moments of my life. What do you remember of that kind of celebration afterwards? And
well, I love the fact Mal, he kicked the first goal of the game and the last, and both were quite amazing. And I think from the first one was a left foot snap from the pocket, on the left-hand side, forward 50. And but he was one I'd like to do with him. He had that fast-track recon, the large ligament to get his knee back quicker.
Yeah.
and then a tour again after 15 months or something, and he had it again. So he was a guy who'd only missed 6 months of footy and had 2 knee recons, and he'd been through quite a lot. So his tenacity to get back and then to play at the level he played and to effectively kick the goal that sort of sealed the grand final was just a moment that I loved seeing, because obviously I was quite close to him.
Yeah.
You know, as his doctor through all of that.
Yeah.
And that was another great moment where the bench went berserk. I think the physio jumped on top of me and I nearly did a disc. That was another great, and that was once again, having been through the great win and then a loss, I knew what losing was like. So 2012 was a great moment to be able to enjoy a win, particularly because the Hawthorn team they were, if you remember, a bit like West Coast, they were just jam-packed with superstars.
Mm.
When you look at it, you know, Jordan Lewis and Mitchell and Hodge and obviously Franklin and Roughhead and Bruce and Brewer, Josh Gibbs, and like they were just star-studded like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
So to actually be able to beat them, that was a massive upset. I reckon.
Yeah. Now, last question on the grand final, Nathan. So when you go back to the rooms, obviously there's a lot of celebration and champagne, and and did Roos or Longmire just have the players and maybe the staff together for that really special moment at all?
They tended to do it on grand final days. When you win, it's absolutely chaotic. So anything you might have pre-planned just goes out the window. So getting all the players and staff together was never going to happen. I think they tried to get the team together at some point. I think most of the coaches actually, midway through the following week, they have a team and coach sort of night.
Okay.
Where they actually sit down, watch the game again, and have a few beers and just talk about how good it was type moment.
Yeah.
Whereas because of the enormity of winning a grand final, you just can't control the dressing room, and it's full of so many well-wishers and family and supporters and sponsors and long-term benefactors of the club that you just can't tell them not to come in. Obviously, they've got a right to be there. So there's no way you can have any coordinated, controlled meeting scenarios. They have to be done at some other time.
Yeah.
But it's a great. Having said that, being in a winning dressing room with thousands of people in total chaos is exactly how you'd like to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a few questions for you, quick ones here, Nathan. So Luke's given us a rundown of your background involvement in professional sport. So I'm just going to throw a few quick ones at you. So first, the best team player you've seen, someone just always team focused, unselfish, at their own personal cost at different points. Who would that be?
Actually, certainly with AFL in mind and the Swans, without doubt, the two people actually who actually made the Bloods culture, Stuart Maxfield, who you may or may not remember, Brett Kirk, they were two who weren't the greatest players, they were the best leaders on and off the field you will ever see. And they formulated the Bloods culture where anyone who made a mistake, the whole squad would be punished. And the whole squad would be punished because everyone's a team, everyone's in it together. And if you make a mistake, well, we look out for people who make mistakes. You're still part of the team. That sort of concept and culture, they drove and drove and drove. And when there was a team punishment on, they were the first ones there, and they were the first ones leading, whatever it might be. It might be a 5 a.m. turn up at the beach, swim and stretch session, which no one wants to do. But they'd be the first one there, leading the way, saying, this is what we have to do if we want to become a great club. So those guys did everything that was the right thing to do, no matter what the circumstances. And they were there was the least selfish players I've ever been involved with. So they were a big part of what happened in 2005 and obviously then into 2012.
Most hostile crowd you've seen?
There's probably two. If you've ever gone to a Wallabies game in Bloemfontein in South Africa, that's pretty tough.
Yeah.
But I liken it to the probably a qualifying or prelim final against West Coast it'd be up there as well. If people may not be aware, but the actual bench at Subiaco used to be a dugout underground, sort of one step underground.
Yeah.
And so you'd be below the level of the first row of people, and then you'd stick your head up if you had to go on the ground, and there'd be a row of people, and they'd leave their schooners on the dugout roof.
Yeah.
You know, and so you'd get up, and then these people would start yelling abuse at you at the moment you stuck your head out of the dugout. and so it was quite funny at times, because all the games were always close. So you were never confident that you were going to win the game, that you could actually give a little bit back.
Yeah.
So,
and as a doctor, worst injury you've seen and had to deal with?
I've had a couple of really bad ones. Probably the Teddy Richards one, where he had a badly punctured lung and 8 broken ribs. It was at Etihad playing Carlton, and the Favola ran forward as he was running back, and his knee took out half of the back of Teddy's rib cage. So that was a sort of medical emergency where we had to get him to hospital pronto or decompress the punctured lung, or would have been life and death. But that had a good ending, obviously. But those sort of moments just make you aware of, I suppose, the importance of having medical care at games, and the fact that there is a risk of serious injury. Thankfully, very rarely though.
Right.
Now, a couple of ones, and beyond the Adam Goods grand final story, is there a player playing through pain, any code that springs to mind that you just look at and go, wow, that's tough?
Oh, there's lots in codes I can think of, but one for you guys from West Coast, which I love telling. It's the qualifying final in 06, where on the Thursday before the Saturday game, Darren Jolly, he's coming up against Dean Cox, the best ruckman in the game, and we need Jolly out there. He has a compound dislocation of his index finger at training. He's running off the ground, and it was on the front page, the lead item on the news that night, and the pictures all through the paper the next morning, of blood pouring out the tip of his index finger, which was bent over and totally severed. Okay. And we managed to obviously reduce the dislocated knuckle, stitch it up. He played 2 days later with the club and with painkiller against Jolly against Dean Cox, and we won the game to then go into the home prelim final, and I think he was nearly man of the match. So that two things: one, the fact he was able to play and wanted to play, because mentally you need a player to be able to do that, and to play so well against such a good player just showed how tough he was sort of mentally to be able to do that.
Yeah, okay. Now, you've obviously almost connected with thousands of professional athletes. What's the difference between, in your opinion, between those that come on the scene and leave a year or two later and those that have really long careers?
Actually, I think what makes a great player is longevity in the game. The fact that you hang around for a long time, that in itself makes you great, rather than you need to be great in order to do that. I think it's the other way around. And the reason I say that is the best players, it's their attitude to adversity. Because everyone has adversity in their lives and in football. There might be personal sadness and issues that happen along the way of your journey playing football. Everyone gets injured, and everyone has to deal with their injuries and missing football. Invariably, players get dropped at some stage in their career, or they fall offside with the coach, and so issues happen with actually getting picked in the team. And so it's how you deal with that, and how you deal with improving, not spinning the dummy, but just improving yourself in any way you can whilst you're not playing footy, in order to get you back at a level that'll make you a better player. Yeah. And I reckon that's the thing that certainly, to me, makes the great players great, and allows them to play footy for a long time.
That's great advice. Two last ones. Do you still keep in touch with any of the Swans boys?
Actually, because I was there for that long a period, a lot of the players from 05 through 2012 and beyond sort of played their whole careers with me as doctor, which is a lovely thought. So a lot of those guys I am quite close to still. Quite a few of them still live around the eastern suburbs where I am here in Sydney. So let's say that the Jude Boltons, the Eamon Buchanans, Adam Snyders, Ty Keneally's, Michael O'Loughlin, Adam Goods. Yeah, I see quite a bit of them on a regular basis. And LRT, Lewis Robbins Thompson, those sort of people are really good value.
Yeah, it's great that those connections last. Now, your last kind of, or your most recent experience as a sports doctor was your World Cup, Japan, 2 months. What was that like? And last question, what was that like compared to obviously 15 years in AFL and some league? What was that World Cup experience like?
Well, it was absolutely amazing, and it's a bit like this. If I said to you, okay, we're going to play a game of the Swans playing West Coast in Tokyo, and 50,000 people are going to fly over for the game and spend 10 days there and watch it and go absolutely berserk. That's what happens at the World Cup. That's the emotion. And it's a bit like international rugby, where there's a sellout nearly every time it's ever played, and certainly in World Cup, all the games were sellouts. It's not unlike having a grand final at the MCG every time you play. So in terms of the build-up and the emotion and so to do it for World Cup level, to do it through the 4 qualifying stages and then to do it into the knockout phase, and then to get to the World Cup final, which obviously Australia didn't get to, but the teams that got there, like the pressure and the wear and tear just psychologically must have been unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, a little known fact about you, Nathan, is you actually played some rugby league back in the day with a Hale staff member, Richard Tongue. Now that goes a way back.
Back at South States, yes.
Yeah. Not many people know that about Richard, but I've dropped the secret there, so he's going to get a few more questions now. But one thing we have here...
Former great player.
Great player, Richard Tongue. There we go. So we have Pie Day here on Tuesdays, where all the boarders get meat pies and all the staff get meat pies, and some of the stuff the boarders do with the meat pies in terms of taking the lid off and putting sauce in and eating it with a spoon. I think I'm going to know how Nathan Gibbs brought up, as a South Sydney Rugby League player will eat a meat pie, but do let us know.
Actually, I'm not sure how tough the boarding is there, but I've never ever eaten a meat pie with a spoon. In fact, I pride myself on the ability to definitely put sauce on it and to eat it with one hand and not to spill any of the meat. So that's how I judge. That's how I judge a good meat pie, and also my ability to eat a good meat pie.
Oh, classic. Thanks, Nathan. Now, we'll wrap it up there, mate. Really appreciate it. There's a lot of insight there into your career, and, wishing you, and I know Sydney's a bit of a hot spot for all this bug at the moment, so you, Kerry, and the boys, all the best, and stay safe and healthy over the next couple of weeks and months, and hopefully we'll see you back on the sidelines in State of Origin if that happens, or if not, somewhere down the track this year. Really appreciate it, mate.
Fantastic. Nice talking to you guys.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Good on you.